Project 3, Strokes and Fills. On the Canvas page for the assignment, you should find an instruction sheet in the form of a PDF, which you can download, and if you click on that, it should download, and a zip file or zip folder called DL3 Images for AI, and you should download that. Try to pay attention to where you download these things. This is my zip file. If you are on a Windows operating system, you can right-click on this and select Extract. On the Mac operating system, usually it will unzip automatically when downloaded, or you can double-click on it and it will unzip. Makes a folder inside the folder, so I'm going to drag that folder out of there. I don't really need two folders, or a folder inside a folder and nothing else in that folder. Delete the old folder. And if you open that up, you'll see lots of pictures. Some are objects, some are animals. We've got tools, musical instruments, vehicles. I'd like you to pick something that interests you or that means something to you, and we'll use that for this next exercise. I have some examples. These are demos that I've done in class in previous years. You can see that I started with an ice cream cone. Select that so it'll zoom in on that. Okay, there's a fairly detailed ice cream cone there because it's a photograph of an ice cream cone. And this is an interpretation of that ice cream cone as line art. Command Y, wireframe, you can see that I've got 3 paths here to make my ice cream cone. I want you to draw the thing that you select in a simple form, a simple graphic form. Don't go into a lot of detail because we may be using effects on these paths that will be too complicated to have 12 of them with complicated things happening and lots of detail and still have a compact file size. There's no reason to make a large file out of this. Let me go over to my folder here where I have these. Notice this one here marked Demo Do Not. Well, don't do this. Notice that I've got file sizes here between 6 megabytes and 21 megabytes, but this one is almost 100 megabytes, 98.3 megabytes. And that's because it's a very detailed drawing. You don't need this much detail. You need to make a simple interpretation of it. There's so much going on in here that it also slows down the computer. Many of these strokes that were applied have a great deal of complexity to them, so that also adds to the file size in addition to just the fact that there's more anchor points and more paths. So try to keep it simple. Let me give you another example. This is a 1919 drawing by Picasso of 3 women dancing. This is not the kind of drawing we're looking for. This is also a drawing of 3 women dancing by Picasso, but from a later period when he was exploring line art where each figure is drawn with a single line. This is also a drawing of a woman by Picasso, and this consists of only 4 lines. This is called minimalist art. This is a penguin by Picasso in his 1-line period, and this is a hawk by Picasso. Where might you use this sort of technique effectively? Think about logos, corporate identities. As you go through your daily life, look for logos and corporate identities and see how many of them are minimalist art representing something. For example, this is a minimalist drawing of a woman for a women's health center. So this is a technique that you can use in graphic design for logos, for posters, for graphic effects, for symbols. So after you have chosen a photograph of something that you find interesting, the ones that actually have backgrounds like the vehicles, those are probably more appropriate for Project 4. You will probably be using this same folder of images for Project 4, so even though you're just choosing the ice cream cone or a cat or a dog or a trumpet or a saxophone or a car, don't throw away the rest of them. Save it because you'll be selecting images again from this for Project 4. Once you find an image that you find interesting for whatever reason, drag that image into your Illustrator document. And this big X here, this means this is a linked image. It's not actually embedded in the document. If I wanted it to be included as part of the file and have all those extra pixels, all that extra data added to my file after I'm done converting it to a drawing, I can hit embed, and then that becomes part of my file. So it increases the file size. I'm going to unembed and leave it as a non-embedded or a linked file. If you go to the window pull down and look for links, you'll see this shows as a linked image. And it gives the details of the type of file, the size of the file, it's RGB. When you do your new document for this, I'd say go ahead and make it an RGB file. We don't need 4-color process for anything we're doing in this project. And then on the layer palette, lock that layer and run a new layer just so you don't accidentally move things. It doesn't matter what size you draw it here. You can do it with a paintbrush. I'm going to make sure there's no fill when I'm doing this. Paintbrush, maybe the pencil. You can do it with the pen tool, but this might be a lot more work than we need to do for this. If you take the pencil tool, you can use it more like a pencil and just draw around it, keeping the mouse button pressed when you're doing that. And you know, if it's not perfectly accurate, it doesn't really matter, because we're looking for kind of an interpretation of this thing, not necessarily an accurate drawing. You can go back with your direct select tool or the pen tool. I'm going to change this from painting to Essentials Classic because it gives me a different set of tools. And in my pen tool, I now have the minus anchor point, the plus anchor point, and the anchor point tool. And I'm just going to delete some of these. Actually, I'm going to go a step further than that. I'm going to use my main selection tool. So let me just go ahead and pull these down this way. With my direct select. With my main selection tool, I'll have it selected. And then under Object, Path, Simplify, I'm going to click on this to get the options. I can minimize the number of anchor points. I can smooth out curves. And let's see if that makes a lot of difference there. I don't know that it did. Just manually move some of these a little bit. Okay, so that's my ice cream. And again, using probably the pencil tool, I'm going to draw a simple interpretation of the cone. Well, you know what? I have a little trouble with my mouse. I think I'll go ahead and use the pen tool for that one. Alright, well, that's my very clumsy attempt at an ice cream cone. Squeeze that down and move this over this way. Take my direct select tool and probably move some anchor points a little bit. And I think I'll try the pencil one more time for this. Oops, I didn't want to connect to that. I'm going to start up here. And just clean that up a little bit. Maybe get rid of some anchor points. Okay, one ice cream cone. Now I started from the top down, which means they're layered in that order. And I think I'd actually like this to be on top, this one on the bottom, and that'll just make some difference in how the strokes overlap when I actually apply something to it. Okay, now the pencil tool draws like a pencil as opposed to the pen tool, which draws from anchor point to anchor point with Bezier curves. Brushes act like brushes. So I'll take my paintbrush. Oh, there's a blob brush too. You can try that. take my paintbrush, and that's how it looks with a 5-point round uniform brush. But in my brush palette, I have just a few default brushes. I could use this one, or I could take an existing stroke such as my ice cream cone and apply that brush to it. I can make it fatter. Might be interesting. I can make this one fatter. I could use a fan brush. I could draw with the fan brush, paint with it, maybe fill in a texture on something. You know, maybe if I wanted to, that's kind of big. Is it half point? It just doesn't actually seem to draw where you're actually pointing it. But, you know, I could maybe put some little shadows in there with the fan brush. Let me turn off the original photo. I don't really need that once I've got a loose drawing of an ice cream cone. The other brushes, there's this thing here which might be interesting for something. Let me take a brush and draw with it. It's kind of small. Could be interesting for something. These ones that have pixel-based elements to them, I would kind of avoid those because those are apt to unnecessarily increase the file size. You could try some of those. Or with a brush tool. Now there's not much to choose from there, but there's brush libraries. There are brush libraries. And they're down here at the bottom right corner of the palette. That's also true for the symbols. There's a symbol library. And on the swatch palette, there's a swatch palette library with different arrangements of color. Maybe you want earth tones. Maybe you want patterns. Maybe you want color books are the type of arrangements of color that we use commercially. The Pantone matching system is internationally recognized as a standard for how certain colors are mixed. So you would use those libraries if you were working on something involving Pantone colors. There's a web, default print, video and film, mobile, and art and illustration default swatch palettes that you could use. There are patterns here. So for example, I could fill this with red or orange, a gold, sort of a mocha color. Need some chocolate chips in there, I think. Or I could use gradients, and you can also mix your own gradients. And where you mix gradients is on the gradient palette. I'll pull this off. So for example, if I wanted to go from this color here, pull that off, to maybe to white. I should have gone the other way. I'll drop the white over here. Okay, so there's a gradient. I could change the angle of it, any angle I want to type in there. I could make it a radial gradient, a linear gradient, or a multicolored gradient. I'll try some gradients. You also have a gradient slider here where I can adjust exactly what rate that blends at. You can change the rate at which it goes from one color to another. You can add more than one color. Add another color. And there it is. If I hover correctly over this, I can change the angle by turning that gradient slider.